Vampires don't sleep.
It's not intended for sleep.
Why are you short-tongued? Why do you not have your short-tongue? Shut up!
Absolutely.
It's going to say water damage from the sprinkler system.
You serve absolutely no function whatsoever. It's pathetic.
Last time, we looked at Matthew McConaughey, a man who saw the trap, made a plan, and executed a controlled demolition of his own career. He turned down $14.5 million, disappeared for 2 years, and came back with an Oscar. It was calculated, it was strategic, it was, in its own way, very grown up. Robert Pattinson's escape was none of those things. It was messy, instinctive, occasionally self-destructive, and driven by something closer to rage than reason. If McConaughey dismantled his old career, like an architect taking down a building floor by floor, Pattinson grabbed a sledgehammer and started swinging. And the wildest part, it worked. Even better. To understand what Pattinson was running from, you have to understand what Twilight did to him. Not what it did for his career, what it did to him. In 2008, Robert Pattinson was 22 years old. He'd done some stage work in London, played Cedric Diggory in one Harry Potter film, and was seriously considering quitting acting because he couldn't get any jobs. He said this openly, that before Twilight, he was on the edge of giving up entirely. Not in the dramatic, tortured artist sense, in the practical sense. The auditions weren't landing, the money wasn't there. He described it not as quitting, but as surrendering to fate. Then Twilight happened. And overnight, Robert Pattinson went from an unknown British actor to the most famous face on the planet. The first film alone made nearly $400 million worldwide. The franchise would eventually gross over $3 billion. Pattinson's face was on every magazine cover, every bedroom wall, every tabloid front page. He couldn't walk down a street without being swarmed. Fans screamed. Paparazzi chased his car. His personal life, particularly his relationship with co-star Kristen Stewart, became global entertainment. He was not just famous, he was the kind of famous that erases your actual identity and replaces it with a character. And here's the thing that most people don't realise about Pattinson during this period. He hated it. Not the money, not the opportunity, not even the fame itself exactly. The creative experience of making those films. He's described being infuriated on the set of the first Twilight.
I don't know, I think it's just the way it's written, it just seems so personal.
Right.
It seems like it's wasn't really meant for publication.
Clashing with the studio over his interpretation of the character. He wanted Edward Cullen to be darker, more tortured, more psychologically complex, what he called too emo. The studio wanted a heartthrob. The studio won. They always win. He nearly got fired for pushing back. And after that close call, he learned to keep his head down and get through the remaining 4 films. But the damage was done. Not to his career, which was soaring, but to something inside him. Every press tour where he had to smile and pretend he loved being Edward Cullen. Every interview where journalists asked about his love life instead of his craft. Every fan who screamed his name and saw a character, not a person. It was all building pressure. He's admitted in later interviews that he makes things up in press junkets, just invents stories, says ridiculous things, partly because he's bored, partly because the manufactured version of himself that the publicity machine demanded felt so disconnected from who he actually was that he might as well treat the whole thing as performance art. That's not the behaviour of a happy, well-adjusted movie star. That's the behaviour of someone dissociating from their own public identity. But something had crystallised inside him during those years. A determination that when the franchise was over, when the contractual obligation was fulfilled, he would never, ever let himself be trapped like that again. Most actors in Pattinson's position after Twilight would have done the obvious thing. You've got global name recognition, a massive fan base, and studios throwing money at you. You take the next big franchise, you do the action movie, you become the next Tom Cruise or Chris Hemsworth. You ride the wave. Pattinson looked at the wave and swam in the opposite direction. His first move after Twilight ended in 2012 was to call David Cronenberg. Not a studio, not an agent, David Cronenberg, the Canadian director known for body horror, psychological disturbance, and films that make audiences profoundly uncomfortable. Cronenberg cast him in Cosmopolis, a film about a billionaire asset manager crossing Manhattan in a limousine while his empire collapses. It's cold, it's cerebral, it's the furthest thing imaginable from a teenage vampire romance. The film was divisive, critics were split. Audiences who showed up expecting Edward Cullen got something they didn't recognise, and that was entirely the point. Pattinson wasn't trying to transition gently into more serious work. He was trying to make his Twilight fans forget he existed. What followed was one of the strangest filmographies any young actor has ever assembled. He worked with David Michaud on The Rover, playing a violent, mentally unstable drifter in a post-apocalyptic Australian outback. He worked with Werner Herzog on Queen of the Desert. He did a film with Anton Corbijn called Life, where he played a photographer. He did Claire Denis' High Life, a deeply strange science fiction film set on a spacecraft that doubles as a prison. None of these films were hits. Several of them weren't even good. But that wasn't the point.
Come on.
Every single one of them was chosen for the same reason, because it was as far from Twilight as humanly possible. Pattinson was systematically destroying his commercial value, and he was doing it on purpose. This is where his approach diverges sharply from McConaughey's. McConaughey's pivot was strategic. He turned down rom-coms, waited for the right dramatic roles to appear, and built a staircase back to the top, brick by brick. He knew where he was going. He had a plan. Pattinson didn't have a plan. He had an allergy to anything that felt safe, commercial, or expected. He wasn't building toward anything specific. He was running away from something specific, and the running itself became the strategy. Not because he designed it that way, but because the sheer volume of strange, challenging, uncommercial work he was doing gradually forced the industry to see him differently, whether they wanted to or not. And then, in 2015, something clicked into place. Pattinson was scrolling through the internet and came across a single promotional still from a film called Heaven Knows What, a gritty, low-budget New York indie about a homeless woman addicted to heroin. He'd never seen the film, he'd never heard of its directors, two brothers named Josh and Benny Safdie. But something about that one image, the rawness of it, the texture, the feeling that these filmmakers were operating on a completely different frequency from mainstream Hollywood, hit him like electricity. He emailed them, cold, no introduction through agents, no formal pitch meeting, just an email that essentially said, "I'm completely certain that we're supposed to work together." The Safdies replied, "Have you seen any of our stuff?" Pattinson, "Nope, don't need to. I know." That's either the behaviour of a lunatic or someone with extraordinary instincts. In this case, it was both, and it produced the film that changed everything. Good Time came out in 2017. Pattinson plays Connie Nikas, a two-bit criminal in Queens who botches a bank robbery and spends one increasingly desperate night trying to bail his mentally disabled brother out of jail. The character is sweaty, manipulative, selfish, and completely lacking in the kind of charisma that movie stars are supposed to project. Pattinson dyed his hair, adopted a thick outer borough accent, and made himself physically unrecognisable.
I found some hair dye in your bathroom.
You dyed your hair.
Yeah.
He looked, in the words of one review, like he'd been dragged through a gutter and set on fire. The shoot itself was unlike anything Pattinson had experienced. The Safdies work with tiny crews, real locations, and non-professional actors pulled from the actual neighbourhoods they're filming in. There's no trailer for the star, no quiet on set. Pattinson described it as feeling punk. The cinematographer would physically push him into position for the right shot. On a normal film, that would have caused an incident. On the Safdies set, it was just how things worked. And here's the detail that tells you everything about where Pattinson's head was at. They shot on the streets of New York, one of the most celebrity-saturated cities on Earth. And nobody recognized him. Not once. No cell phone photos, no paparazzi. Not because of some elaborate security operation, but because Pattinson had made himself look so thoroughly grimy and wrecked that people avoided him on instinct. The most recognizable face of the Twilight generation, invisible on a New York sidewalk, because he'd chosen to look like a man nobody would want to be. He later joked, "It also helps if you look really dirty. Nobody comes up to you, people avoid you." Then, after a beat, "Or I might just not be famous anymore. I mean, it's a possibility. The film premiered at Cannes, in competition for the Palme d'Or. The audience reaction was immediate and stunned. This was the guy from Twilight. The Safdie brothers later described what they saw in Pattinson when they first met him, a kind of mania that the public never got to see. The polished, beautiful, guarded celebrity image was hiding something raw and volatile underneath, and Good Time was the first film that let it out. Benny Safdie said they trusted him from the start because, unlike other actors who say they want to take risks, Pattinson actually meant it. When they told him the conditions, small crew, real locations, real non-professional actors, no celebrity treatment, he told his agents, "Don't counter the offer, just take it. I'm doing this film, and I don't want to hear anything that might slow it up." Good Time landed at 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. Pattinson was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award. Critics called the performance a revelation and a career peak. And suddenly, the conversation about Robert Pattinson changed completely. He wasn't the Twilight guy trying to be taken seriously. He was a serious actor who happened to have once been in Twilight. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it does. McConaughey had to erase himself and start over. Pattinson did something slightly different. He buried the old version of himself under so much rubble that by the time someone dug down to the foundation, what they found wasn't Edward Cullen. It was something they'd never seen before. After Good Time, the opportunities that came his way were the opportunities he'd been chasing all along. Robert Eggers cast him in The Lighthouse, opposite Willem Dafoe, a black and white psychological horror film about two lighthouse keepers going mad on a remote island. The shoot was grueling. Pattinson has talked about being physically ill during filming, about the freezing conditions, about scenes that required him to howl into the wind while covered in filth. It's one of the most physically demanding and psychologically intense performances of the last decade.
Authentic lighthouse cutlery from the 1880s or something.
And it confirmed what Good Time had suggested, that Pattinson wasn't just willing to suffer for a role, he actively sought out the suffering because it produced something real. Christopher Nolan cast him in Tenet, a massive $200 million blockbuster. But notice what happened here. Pattinson didn't go back to blockbusters because he needed them. He went back because Christopher Nolan asked. The distinction matters. He'd earned the right to choose his blockbusters rather than being dependent on them. That's the privilege that the years of indie work had bought him. The King put him in period drama. The Devil All the Time gave him a southern preacher role that was genuinely creepy. Bong Joon-ho, the director of Parasite, one of the most acclaimed films of the century, cast him in Mickey 17. Every project was chosen because the filmmaker was someone Pattinson respected, not because the paycheck was large or the franchise was profitable. And then came the Batman.
Rather die than talk. What was she afraid of? You?
When it was announced in 2019 that Robert Pattinson would be the next Bruce Wayne, the internet erupted. Not in a good way. Fan petitions were launched, demanding that Warner Brothers recast the role. Comment sections filled with some version of the same complaint. The sparkly vampire can't be Batman. People who hadn't seen Good Time, The Lighthouse, or any of his post-Twilight work were judging him on a role he'd played a decade earlier, which is precisely the kind of typecasting his entire career pivot had been designed to escape. Pattinson's response to the backlash was characteristically unbothered. He told the Los Angeles Times he was actually mocked less than I usually am, adding with a laugh, "Only 70% negative, A+." He also said something revealing about why he wanted the role. It's much more fun when you're an underdog. There's no expectation of you. Think about that. A decade after being one of the most famous people on the planet, Robert Pattinson still saw himself as an underdog. That's not false modesty, that's the mindset of someone who chose to strip away every advantage his fame gave him and rebuild from zero, and who still carried that outsider energy, even when the biggest franchise in superhero cinema came knocking. The Batman grossed over $770 million worldwide. Critics praise Pattinson's portrayal as the most psychologically grounded Bruce Wayne ever put on screen. Brooding, damaged, detective first rather than superhero first. Director Matt Reeves had written the script with Pattinson specifically in mind, citing his post-Twilight work as proof that the actor could bring something no previous Batman had: genuine vulnerability masked by rage. A sequel is in development. And here's what makes Pattinson's story the perfect complement to McConaughey's in this season about pivots. McConaughey's pivot was a masterclass in patience and discipline. He identified the problem. He was trapped in a genre that didn't fulfill him. He designed the solution. Stop doing that genre entirely. Endure the silence. Wait for the right opportunities. He executed the plan over 2 years, and it worked. It's a story about strategic sacrifice. Pattinson's pivot was a masterclass in instinct and rebellion. He identified the same problem. He was trapped inside a franchise persona that didn't represent who he was as an artist. But instead of designing a solution, he just started running. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't have a 2-year plan or a target list of directors. He had an email to 2 filmmakers he'd never met, based on a single photograph from a film he'd never seen, driven by a feeling he couldn't articulate beyond, "I know." McConaughey's lesson is, if you know what you want, have the discipline to sacrifice everything that isn't it, even when the cost is terrifying. Pattinson's lesson is different, and in some ways harder. It's, if you don't know what you want, but you know what you're not, follow that instinct as far as it will take you, even if the path looks like chaos from the outside. Both of them ended up in the same place, respected actors with the freedom to choose their own projects, working with the directors they admire, doing work that challenges them. But they got there by completely different routes. One was a controlled demolition, the other was a jailbreak. And the thing about a jailbreak is that it only works if you're willing to leave everything behind. The money, the safety, the fan base, the guarantee that someone will still care about you when the smoke clears. McConaughey left behind $14.5 million. Pattinson left behind something harder to quantify, the certainty of being wanted. He walked away from a world where millions of people adored him into a world where nobody was sure what he was doing, including himself. That takes a different kind of courage than McConaughey's. McConaughey's courage was the courage of conviction. He knew this would work, and he bet on himself. Pattinson's courage was the courage of uncertainty. He had no idea if it would work. He just knew he couldn't stay. Most people who feel trapped in their careers tell themselves the same story. I'll make the change when I have a plan, when I know where I'm going, when the risk is manageable, when I can see the other side. Robert Pattinson didn't wait for any of that. He ran before he had a destination. He burned the map before he'd drawn a new one. And somewhere in the middle of the chaos, somewhere between Cronenberg and the Safdies, between a sparkly vampire and a scuzzy Queen's criminal, he found the actor he was always supposed to be. He didn't find it because he had a strategy. He found it because he was honest about what he wasn't. And sometimes that's enough. That's it for this one. Next time on Stunt Casting, we're closing out the season with an actor who didn't pivot at all. He just kept showing up, kept being himself, and waited for the world to come back around. Keanu Reeves simply refused to disappear.